justice for all.
Thank you, Ms. Wall. Ms. Atkinson, would you do the land acknowledgement, please?
We would like to acknowledge the city and borough of Juneau as on Tlingit land and wish to honor the indigenous people of this land. For more than 10,000 years, Alaska Native people have been and continue to be integral to the well-being of our community. We are grateful to be in this place, a part of this community, and to honor the culture, traditions, and the resilience of the Tlingit people. Gunashish.
Thank you, Ms. Atkinson. All right, so that will lead us to special order of business. Oh, thank you. I guess we need to make sure we're all here. Madam Clerk, roll call.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Smith.
Here.
Ms. Hughes Candies.
Here.
Mr. Bryson.
Present.
Ms. Wall.
Present.
Walahida.
Here.
Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Ms. Atkinson.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Hill.
Here.
Oh, there you go. And Mayor Weldon.
Here.
A quorum is present.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Now to special order of business. Madam Manager, a flood update.
Thank you. I'd like the opportunity to give the body and the public an update on the significant work that has been ongoing since the last time we addressed the Assembly at the Committee of the Whole, which was just 1 week ago. So if you recall, at the Committee of the Whole, we did talk about the possibility of a second release of Suicide Basin. The basin is filling, but it does fluctuate. I want to kind of echo NOAA and National Weather Service and temper concerns about a second large release. And there are a few reasons for this. After talking with the scientists there, I just want to explain. So right now, the basin is about half full. It's at the 10-foot stage. If you recall, we get flooding of like the campground, and we have to close a few roads when it gets to the 12-foot stage. And so the reason it fills more quickly in the spring is because you have it filling from snowmelt and rainwater. Right now, it is just filling with rainwater. Now, of course, this is our rainy time of year, so that certainly is concerning. But at some point, the rainwater at that elevation will tend to snow. So that's another thing that can temper the filling of the basin. And of course, as we talked about at the last meeting, historically, after a large release, the basin releases a second time before it's full. So that's what has historically happened. All that being said, I think that there's obviously a chance that the basin could release again this fall, and it could be a significant release. And so we're certainly taking that seriously. I want to make sure the public knows where to go to monitor the basin themselves. And I would throw up a website in front of you, but instead I'm going to tell you how I get to it, which is I Google or throw in my search engine, Suicide Basin Juneau Gov or Suicide Basin Juneau NOAA, and that will take you straight to the NOAA's page where they have daily forecasting of Suicide Basin. So some of the things that CBJ staff and CBJ engineering are looking at in the event of any major release are meeting with vendors, talking to vendors about flood fighting and things that we may be able to engage beforehand. We would also, if there were any imminent, and we have warning, right? This basin builds over time. So while we certainly don't have the time that we need to make major preparations, we do have warning. So we would look, if it looked like there would be major flooding, we would be working with the governor's office on a pre-disaster declaration that would allow us to implement some flood fighting measures. And again, we're researching what type of near-term things we could have, like purchasing large sandbags and having them on hand. I know Deputy Manager Barr met with a vendor today that does water-filled flood fighting. So I certainly cannot promise any large-scale plans, but I do want to let people know that we are thinking of it, and that's how that is proceeding. I'm very hopeful once we engage the Army Corps of Engineers flood fighting team, which is a different section of the Army Corps, will be able to bring their expertise on board as well. And just so you know, since the last meeting, CBJ has submitted a request to Governor Dunleavy to submit that request to the Army Corps of Engineers. It has to be it has to be triggered by state or tribal government. So CBJ cannot trigger that request. And I know Governor Dunleavy has that on his desk, and if it hasn't gone out today, it will go out tomorrow. I also know that President Peterson has that request to the Army Corps of Engineers on his desk. So we will be engaging that section of the Corps for their expertise, not only on, being creative in what we could do in the near term, but really what we could do with it before next season's event. So I'm going to talk about the work that has been done since last meeting, only a week ago, to try to advance the goals of trying to prepare for next year's event and then trying to prepare for long-term mitigation. Of course, the Assembly at the Committee of the Whole moved to introduce legislation, which you will see introduced tonight, to fund hydrological modeling of the Mendenhall River and inundation maps. And these are going to be critical for short and long-term planning. We have to know what the river will do if we put a levee here, if we sandbag there. We have to know what the inundation maps look like if there is any additional, water or higher flow. So that's something that while we could have advocated for federal funding for and probably been successful, the Assembly has appropriated those funds, will be appropriating those funds next week. They're introduced today, and then we've scheduled a special meeting, Zoom only at noon on Monday, the 23rd, to adopt that. Another thing that we've been working on is a letter of interest to the Army Corps of Engineers for a general investigation study for the longer term fix. So this is the permanent solution, working with the Corps on that. That general investigation study will look at things like tunneling, permanent ditches and reservoirs and dams and all of that myriad of things that we talked about at our August 19th Assembly meeting. And the Assembly is also introducing an ordinance tonight to appropriate the match for that. And that's a $3 million local match, and then a $3 million federal appropriation is required. And I know that Tlingit and Haida is also working with submitting their own letter to support that request and engage the Army Corps of Engineers in that. We will need to be advocating for funding for the federal share of that match. And so the Army Corps of Engineers has the authority to do the work, but they need the money to do the work. And so we'll put up $3 million and they'll match that with $3 million. Mayor Weldon and I are traveling to Washington, D.C. on Wednesday with representatives from Tlingit and Haida to advocate for that funding. There's some disaster relief funding that's being pulled together. There's also the possibility of advocating for that $3 million as congressionally directed spending. We're also looking at a kind of flood fighting plan that's more permanent, and we'll be advocating for including funding for that. Think about $5 million for design and engineering and installation of a more permanent flood fighting solution, while of course working on that mitigation effort. So those are two efforts that we will be advocating for, not only this week in Washington, D.C., as our congressional delegation struggles to pull together funding for next federal budget year, but also any other opportunities that arise. I mean, people ask me, what happens if this continuing resolution doesn't get introduced or doesn't pull together? Well, then we'll try the next round and really advocate to get that federal money for the Corps to be able to do that work. Let's see, and the other item to update you on is that we are waiting for the state to submit their disaster declaration to the federal government. I know that this is imminent. Again, I've been in contact with DMVA and the governor's office, and that's on the governor's desk. And it's the paperwork. There's just a lot of paperwork involved in this, so this has nothing to do with a lack of volition. It really has to do with crossing our T's and dotting our I's, including all of our, not only all of the disaster assessment for CBJ, but also Tlingit and Haida is working on their disaster assessment so that we can have a unified voice there. So I know that DMVA is working overtime to get that to the president's desk so that, again, when Mayor Weldon and and Clinton and Haida representatives travel to DC, we will have that to advocate for. I know many of you are, wanting to know how to advocate, and I would say contact your federal delegation. Senator Murkowski, Senator Sullivan, and Congresswoman Peltola have been extremely supportive in this. They are ready to go, ready to advocate once they get that declaration. But they will have answers for your questions, that we're working through, right? How can I make my voice heard for X, Y, or Z? How can I advocate for, this concern that I have? And so I just encourage you to use your delegation, use that staff. They're extremely helpful, extremely well prepared. So that is a summary of kind of the work that has happened over the last 7 days, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Does the body have any questions? Mr. Smith?
Madam Mayor, thank you, Madam Manager, for an update on these actions. I guess I just wanted to check in and check to feel how you feel about, the adequacy of our kind of warning or alert system should in a terrible case be another release or a significant release this year. Do we feel good about being able to inform people who are potentially in harm's way should there be another release?
Madam Manager.
I think we've got really good tools. I think we've got the emergency alert system, which was triggered last time. But most importantly, we have everyone's attention. And I think the community is paying attention, and I think that will be really helpful as we, prepare for the worst and hope for the best.
Follow-up?
Not so much a follow-up. I guess I just wanted to confirm the inundation maps that the NWS created and, that were somewhat correct, I guess, after this. That is the inundation map we should be paying attention to as we see, should there be a release. That's as good as we have for information in terms of where we expect the water to go.
Madam Manager.
Yeah, you are correct. At this time, we don't have inundation maps beyond that 16 feet mark. We will be able to relatively accurately, the greater we, certainly not CBJ, but National Weather Service will be able to predict the size of the release when it happens. And getting inundation maps beyond that is such a high priority that CBJ Assembly is funding that with the hydrological study.
Anybody else have any questions?
It's a fire code issue, everyone, so that's why the clerk is trying to get
Do you have a
people.
question? Ms. Hale?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Madam Manager, for the really comprehensive update. This is kind of a piggyback off of Mr. Smith's question. I am assuming if we don't have a release in the next week or two, or as time goes on, and it looks like there may be a large release later, that we might find ways of letting the community know exactly how any kind of warning system will work and exactly what will happen, exactly what to expect, either in a town hall meeting or giving flyers out. Is that correct, Madam Manager? I know we've talked a little bit about that.
Madam Manager.
Yeah, at current fill rates, we have weeks before the basin fills, probably 6 to 7 weeks, if there is no release beforehand. We have lots of channels to notify residents of that. We've notified residents of the fact that the basin's filling again over social media and press releases, and I encourage people to monitor the website as well. We have warning systems in place that we can trigger even earlier, and that's the annoying tone when you drive into the area on your cell phone. And of course, we have talked about hosting a community meeting, and my request to the body and the public is that I'd really like to have some good information from Army Corps of Engineers about flood fighting that I think would be helpful both for citizens and for the Assembly. So, I'm hoping to host that within the next month or so, so that we can have new and good information for our community.
Thank you, Madam Manager.
Madam Manager, I have a quick question. So the Army Corps flood fighting team that could potentially come and help homeowners be prepared on their own, correct? If we can get them to go.
Yeah, I do not know the answer to that question because we have to get the request from the state to engage them. So I will, that's part of the information that I hope to have.
Thank you for that. Anything further from the body? All right, moving down our list, approval of minutes, Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I request approval of the February 5th, 2024 regular assembly meeting draft minutes, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Seeing none, those minutes are approved. Madam Manager, do you have any requests for agenda changes?
No.
Okay, we'll move on to public participation on non-agenda items, and we always start with the people on Zoom. So first we have Steve Bradford. Mr. Allen, if you could bring over Steve Bradford. We don't see him? Okay. Next, we have Elizabeth Figus. Thank you. Mr. Bradford, please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Good. My name is Steve Bradford. I reside at 4401 Riverside Drive. These are the condos that were damaged in the 2023 flood. And of course, I've been following the events on the flood this year. And I'd like to kind of speak to the homeowners that are tuning in or residing. And it's my opinion that we have a short window here to prepare for next year's flood. And I think the homeowners are going to have to band together and solicit their own and figure out their own temporary flood situation or flood solution. You know, I know the city is working with the Corps and whatnot on the long-term solution, and I appreciate the CBJ is updating a temporary flood inundation map, which is good. I mean, kind of need to know what happens when you do this and how it affects somebody else. But I think it's a pretty major impossible task for the homeowners that were flooded this year to think that they have to come up with their own individual solution to prevent damage next year. I think there needs to be a greater plan than that. And I would look to those individual homeowners to organize and pick a leader and move forward with a plan. And at this time, I would entertain any questions from the assembly members or the community.
Mr. Bradford, thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions for Mr. Bradford? Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Bradford, are you aware of a group that people who is there a group started yet that others could join or be connected with, or does that still, anyway, if you're aware of anything where people might be able to join?
I am not aware of any specific group that's been formed so far. I know there's been some neighborhood meetings, but not 300 house wide, maybe per street. So I'm suggesting that they need to get together as a large group and do some brainstorming, maybe solicit some professional help and try to get something in place by next June, because the next flood's coming in early August. We know that. So you plan on something for June, maybe get it done by the middle of July. So I say time is of the essence.
Thank you. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Bradford, for being here and for all the work that you've done with flood combating or dealing with the flood. I just wanted to double check and see if you're aware of some of what City Manager Kester was speaking of, which is the flood fighting team with the Army Corps of Engineers that CBJ has been in contact with. I am certainly I certainly agree that all homeowners need to do whatever they can, but we're also looking at this potential for flood fighting on a bigger scale. And I just wanted to make sure you were aware of that. And I'm sure you could follow up with City Manager Kester if you needed to.
Yes, thank you for that. I followed and took notes on her presentation tonight, so yes, I'd be interested in some information on that. Thank you.
All right, I don't see any further questions, Mr. Bradford, so thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next, we have Elizabeth Figus.
Elizabeth Ficus, if you're online, please raise your hand. I don't see her.
Okay, we'll move on. Judy Israelson.
Judy, you've been unmuted if you care to speak. I know you weren't sure whether or not you wanted to testify tonight, but this would be your opportunity if you would like to speak at this time. Okay, we will excuse Ms. Israelson at this time. I'm not seeing Ms. Ficus on here either, Madam Mayor.
Okay. So the next one we have is Ms. Mesdag, and she's in the room. You want to testify? Maybe that's you. You want to testify? You want to testify? Yeah. Okay. All right, next we're going to Kathleen Rado. Please come up if you're here. And you're going to come over to this chair over here. Now we need to push the button at the bottom so it turns green. There you go. And please state your name and area of town you live in for the record. And you have 3 minutes, which is shown by your lights right there. Green will mean you can start.
My name is Kathleen Rado. Good evening, Assembly members. I live on Emily Way, an area that was heavily hit by the flood. My street was not originally listed as expecting to flood, however it did. As a resident of the Mendenhall Valley, I'm working on plans to protect my home from future floods, including the pending potential flood in October. However, I face limitations. I'm disabled and unable to do the physical work required, such as moving sandbags. 2 of my neighbors are elderly, and like me, they live on fixed income. We do not have the means to manage this alone. While the response of the tribe, city, state, federal, and local volunteers after the flood was commendable, I urge the Assembly to take the proactive stance before the next disaster strikes. We need assistance with immediate flood mitigation measures. Specifically, I ask the city to provide resources for purchasing and placing sandbags for vulnerable residents like myself and my neighbors who cannot physically manage this work. Beyond immediate action, I strongly urge the Assembly to prioritize a long-term flood mitigation plan by adding a levee to help control the glacial outbursts. Glacial flooding in our area is not a one-time event. We need a sustainable strategy to protect lives and homes. We need infrastructure improvements, better early warning systems, and other preventable measures to put in place for long-term flood control. We need your leadership and support to ensure our community's resilience. Please act now, not just in response to the disaster, but to prevent future suffering. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony tonight. Next, we have Renee Culp. And the microphone is already on, so you just need to state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Ganeshish. Hello, esteemed assembly members. My name is Renee Klugen Kalp. I am Chukanady. I live on Emily Way, which was unexpectedly ground zero for this year's glacial outburst. As our street was not listed in the original flood projections, we were given little time when the evacuation notice came. Many of us did not understand the full threat we were facing. On August 5th, I took precautions by moving valuables to my second floor, but even today, I'm still learning just how much more was needed to truly secure my home and ensure my personal safety. In the aftermath of this natural disaster, I witnessed something we often think is impossible. Tribal, city, state, and federal governments work together seamlessly to help us recover from the devastation that struck our neighborhoods. Ganesh Chish, Ganesh Chish, Ganesh Chish. The collaboration was swift, efficient, and it gave us hope. We received heartwarming collective support throughout the recovery efforts, reflecting the true spirit of Alaska, a community that comes together when it is needed most. This year, the flood was larger with a high tide at outburst. What will next year look like? The clock is ticking, and we're on borrowed time. While the recovery efforts have been strong, we must turn our efforts to prevention. I strongly urge our governments to continue this unified approach by finding a path forward that brings both immediate and long-term flood mitigation plans for our community. We need accurate inundation maps, and we need a sound warning system. I don't even know what else we need. We can't wait for the next disaster to strike, and we need to act now. Ganesh Chish for your time. Thank you.
Gunal Chief, any questions for Ms. Culp? Thank you for your testimony tonight.
Ganesh Chish.
Next, we have Margaret Katzik. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Margaret Katzik. I am on Lakeview Court. My Tlingit name is Sa'ach. I'm a Ganach Tedi Raven Woodworm from Klekwan area and a child of the Thunderbird Eagle people. I'm a mother and parent of 4 children and an auntie to many nieces and nephews. And this is the only home that I've ever owned. And that in itself is a big accomplishment and feat for our people and where we come from. And to have this happen to us and not having the knowledge and even warning of that something like this can happen to us is shocking. And we were, like many other families and houses, we were surprised. And as of now, we're living we're living in a constant state of stress and not knowing what to do, not knowing where to go for help. And so we, as in me and my family and extended neighbors, are asking for help. And we're just asking for help.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Gunalchish. Next, we have Sam Hatch. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
My name's Sam Hatch. I live at 3475 Meander Way. We've been through multiple floods. I wanted to specifically ask the Assembly to sign up to participate in FEMA's Community Ratings Program. It's an optional program. Takes a letter from the mayor saying that she wants to participate in that program, and that connects us with FEMA Region 10, which then looks at several aspects of what we're already doing. Do we have inundation mapping? Do we have emergency response? Do we have all these other steps we're taking right now? Then they score us as a community. And when they do that, everyone who now has to have a flood insurance policy as the only practical means of preparing for what could happen next year could get a discount. That's not a lot, but it's something that would directly help people. So I ask that we sign up for that and participate in that program, because I think it's one of the few things we can do to help people save a little bit of money. That's not much, but face it, our only practical means of preparing is to buy flood insurance right now. So please do that. And if you have any questions about that, I'd be happy to answer what I know. I've just been browsing the FEMA websites and trying to reach out to people in the city. But I haven't had a lot of luck getting replies back, and I know a lot of it is because people are full court press on what they're working on, which has been great, and I'm glad we're getting the studies and we're getting this other stuff. But I think that bringing in a FEMA expert and some of those flood response, I'm gonna call them planners, might be really good for us and get us access to some experts that we probably just don't have locally. A lot of my neighbors have been talking, and people really don't know what to do. They don't know whether they should repair. They don't know if it's worth repairing. You know, people are talking about spending tens of thousands of dollars on their own little flood prevention projects. Are they going to work? Is 4 feet enough? Is 2 feet enough? If I put a 4-foot flood barrier because my soil is all sand, does it matter? Would it go under? Will it find a new way under my house? Like, those are all the things people are saying. They don't know what to do, what to spend their money on, or if it's going to work. And that's a terrible place. The way we get forward as a community is to have standards, have the floodplain managed properly, where we tell people, hey, here's the ways to mitigate. Here's our recommended strategies for the types of floods that we're seeing. One of my big worries is, you know, we're not seeing static floodwaters like a hurricane inundation. We're seeing high current. We're talking like 2 or 3 miles an hour down my street. And when that hits a structure, it could carry it away. And unless these structures are retrofitted and we're looking at them the right way and doing kind of basic engineering on them, people could get really hurt. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Hatch? Ms. Hughes-Gandes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for being here tonight, Mr. Hatch. Did you say community ratings?
Rating, like RATING.
Perfect. And then follow-up question to that. Do you know if a community needs to have a minimum score for people to get a discount, or is it just us participating? So it's a minimum score.
They have a point system.
Yeah.
Juneau is unrated, so we're participants in the NFIP, but we have no rating, and the minimum is 500. And in that application, when you go onto their website, it's got a form letter to sign for the mayor, and then it's got like a quick, like, hey, do you do these basic things? And if you do, you're going to get at least 500. And then you can do better as you engage with FEMA. And so you should be able to score more points.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for being here.
Mr. Bryson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Hatch, thank you for this information, because I was going to ask if you were referring to the NFIP, because I was under the impression that Juneau was participant in the National Flood Plan, NFIP, that's what I've always heard it called. So you're saying that this is another level of participation in the city that would, because participation for Juneau in the NFIP does get us a discounted rate currently for flood and earthquake, the extra level. I was under the impression that it helped with it. And you're saying that this additional criteria for the same program is going to then benefit Juneau as a whole even more for individual homeowners that are trying to purchase flood insurance or the combo flood, earthquake, slide insurance?
Mr. Hatch.
Thank you. Kind of. So because we're minimally compliant and unrated community, it means you can buy it. So if they are unsatisfied with how we're doing floodplain management, permitting, et cetera, they can remove us, and then you can't buy insurance. So right now we're minimally compliant. When you go into the community rating system, it's about being more than compliant, about being prepared, and the credit that we as homeowners, when we purchase policies, get is that because we're prepared, because we looked at this, because we're good at notifying, ideally people get less damage, people get less hurt, and we all get a discount on buying our premiums.
All right, Mr. Hatch, thank you for your testimony and bringing that to us. We'll check into it. Thank you. Next, we have, I'm sorry, James Hoke. I always pronounce her wrong. For everybody's information, Mr. Hoke was nominated as Ambassador of the Year by a visitor today.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My name is James Hauk. I live along Douglas Highway in Douglas. I run a business here in town. I've run it for 7 years. It's the Alaskan Pedicab Tours, LLC. I have a lone competitor, and for years at this time of the season, he has told me he is not going to run again next year, and I've backed away from what I'm going to do tonight. I spend $11,000 before I turn the first pedal at the beginning of the season. I run a very professional operation. I will not allow my drivers to engage in any kind of conflict on the pier at any time. My drivers are typically young people between the ages of 18 and 22. I mentor them. They start their own businesses. I help them with their accounting and their taxes, and we get along. What I'm mentoring them on tonight is how to deal with a bully. My competitor, his name is Bill Quayle, and you all are very familiar with the way he acts in this assembly chamber. If you think he acts any differently on the pier, you would be wrong. He has engaged in harassment of my pedicab drivers. He calls them out and forces them to move to another location rather than to engage with him. He has been known to impersonate me, saying that he is me, and getting my pre-booked clients who have paid for their tours up to a year in advance in his cab, and then I have to go and track them down. He has engaged negatively with most businesses in the downtown area, parking his huge pedicab with a big motor in front of businesses. He has specifically engaged with Ms. Labarge and pulled people from the back of her line at Tracy's King Crab Shack and handed them menus from other restaurants around town and encouraged them to go and get crabs somewhere else. I am at wit's end. I do not understand why he behaves the way that he does. I cannot believe that he is making good money on the pier. At this point, I believe he is just out there to be a menace to me and other people of society. He will take people from the Alaska Seaport Dock who have bought excursions from the people who sell their excursions there and get them in his cab, telling them he's going to give them a free ride down to the tram, and he engages them and forces them to take his tour, and they miss their excursion, and then those tour sellers have to reimburse the individual. I have asked others to come tonight to speak on my behalf. My ask is that you deny him his CPV license for next year, and you deny him his permit to load people on the piers through docks and harbors. I'm here to answer any questions that you might have, and it's with a huge regret that I have to come here and publicly air this dirty laundry. I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Haug. Any questions? Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Haug. When you emailed, I did reach out to city staff to ask about this. I just wanted to check, have you reported these instances of harassment or whatever to, I guess, the correct authorities, whoever they may be, Docks and Harbors, JPD, Parks and Rec?
Yes, sir, many times before writing a letter to the assembly as a whole. Yes,
Very
sir.
good. Thank you. I would say.
Mr. Bryson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for coming and testifying tonight. When you receive your permit to operate on the docks, is CBJ clear with you what your level of expectation of behaviors or practices are? Or they just say, here's your permit, have a good time?
They're very clearly laid out, and there are lots of hoops one has to jump through. You don't just show up with a check. You have to have your vehicles inspected. Each of us has to sign a piece of paper saying that we understand what the minimal expectations are in operating both on the pier and in town.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Madam
All right,
Mayor.
thank you, Mr. Haug. Next, we have Reef Rubacher. Hopefully I got that right. Please state your name and area of town you live in, and you have 3 minutes.
Perfect. Do I have to press anything, or is it just?
Nope, it's
Perfect.
perfect.
So my name is Reef Rubacher. I live on North Douglas Highway. I also run a pedicab business called Rickshaw Reef, and I've been able to do so for the last 3 years. You know, thanks to James right here giving me an amazing opportunity. I'm here to answer any questions you guys have regarding Mr. Quayle's behavior, or if you have any other questions for me, I'd be happy to answer.
Any questions? Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I guess I'll just repeat the same question I just asked Mr. Hauk, and that's when there have been instances of, perceived or actual, harassment, whatever, by Mr. Quayle, have you reported those to the appropriate authority?
I have not, but James has.
Okay, very good. I'd encourage you to, I'll do so. Thank you.
All right, and my question would be, have you recorded any of these?
Like,
Documented and,
get like a picture or video. Yeah, several times. No, there's been instances where he has sat and parked outside of like the women's bathroom by the tram and just sat there and stared in the bathroom. And we have gotten pictures of him documenting doing that. Just stuff that's blatantly behavior that's just not acceptable, stuff along those lines. And anytime we try to get a documentation when possible. There's been another instance where me and my sister, she runs a pedicab with me and James, and we were sitting and parked by Tracy's Crab Shack, and Bill came up, Mr. Quayle came up and parked right between us. And you're allowed to park wherever you'd like, but he came up right this close in between our bikes, which were already parked close to each other. And he was yelling, "Oh, don't get in with them. They're not allowed to take you there," and stuff along those lines, And we had passengers get out of our cab because they didn't know what was going on, and someone's coming up and telling them, "Hey, don't go with them." And it was, So I have documentation of several instances of non-okay behavior.
Ms. Hughes Candies?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thanks for being here. I believe you said that you've run pedicab for more than one season, is that correct?
Yeah, this is my third year running my business.
And have you received that kind of harassment all 3 years?
Oh yeah. This is not a one-time issue.
Okay,
This is definitely a recurring problem.
thank you.
All right, I see no further questions, so thank you for your testimony.
Right on, thank you.
I'll Ms. Rubacher, not try the first name. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Alrighty, so my name is Jacaranda Rubacker, and I live over on North Douglas Highway as well. And I'm a pedicabber, just like my brother Reef, and alongside James, I have my own small business called Rickshaw Rubacker. And I just want to be here today to go along with what they said about the harassment from Mr. Quayle and answer any questions that you guys had.
All right, thank you. Any further questions? Mr. Bryson?
I know this is a awkward line of questioning, but as the behavior has, have you seen it escalate? And does it go beyond, hey, don't get in their cab, and go more into like a personal attack on you, like personal insults to you? Or is he just screaming about who rides in what cabs? And have you ever been made to feel unsafe because of the aggression?
No, I have never made, he's never made me feel unsafe, but going along with what my brother said, me and him will like park next to each other and he'll like come up in between us and pretty much try to confuse the public and confuse people that want rides and say that we're not allowed to do that and make them believe that we're doing something we're not supposed to, pretty much taking people right out of our own cabs.
All right, thank you for your testimony tonight.
Thank you.
Next, we have Sandra Edwardson. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Will do. Howa. My name is Sandra Edwardson. I live on Killowitch Drive. I'm here tonight as a concerned community member to talk about something that is on many of our minds, flood preparation. After the last assembly committee of the whole meeting, I, like many others, became anxious when we heard the National Weather Service warning us about another potential outburst sooner than we expected. A neighbor said to me, "I haven't even finished repairs from the last flood. Now I have to prepare for the next one." Many of us are in the same situation. We've even postponed contracted work or repairs to our house because we don't know what's coming next. What I want to emphasize here is that we are all feeling frustration, fear, and uncertainty. And the reality is a flood is coming soon. Since last week's meeting, I've been talking to my neighbors, and what is clear is that we need help. We are not experts in flood mitigation. Without professional guidance, we risk making costly mistakes that won't actually protect our homes. So I'm here to ask the Assembly to hire flood mitigation experts. Yes, I just heard that hopefully we can partner with the Army Corps of Engineers to flood fight, and hopefully that includes us. But I came here to encourage you, if we can, to hire folks or experts who can guide us, those of us living in the danger zone before the next glacier outburst. We need their knowledge to make informed decisions and to protect our homes and our families. And let's not forget the most vulnerable, especially the elderly in our community who might not have the financial means to invest in flood protection. They need support to prepare for the future floods too. In closing, I urge you to listen to those of us directly affected by the floods. We need your leadership to prioritize flood preparedness. By bringing in experts and creating effective strategies, we can build a stronger, more resilient Juneau together. Howa for your time, and I look forward to seeing you act to support our community. And on a side note, because that was written, I want to thank you all for all of the flood work that you guys did after the flood, because that was so important for me and my neighbors. I really felt you folks with us and beside us Unfortunately, we're just going to need a little bit more. So, thank you.
Any questions for Ms. Edwardson? Howa? All right, we usually don't have a packed room, so if anybody else would like to testify, you're welcome to step forward. Seeing, oh, there we go, two, come on in. And Madam Clerk, will you pass that down so we can sign in? Here's it. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Samia Savell, and I live at 9230 Emily Way. I'm one of the many affected landowners from the August 6th flood of this year. And I see you, View Drive residents, and I apologize for not being here earlier. We're late on working on flood mitigation measures. And this is homework that should have been started a while ago. We definitely need an updated flood inundation model, but we need one that is projected to at least a 20-foot flood inundation level. We found out that it was a 16-foot flood at like 9 o'clock the night before the flood actually crested. That's definitely not enough time to prepare a household for what ended up being a complete upending of our lives. We did what we could in a very short period of time. And fortunately, you know, things definitely could have been worse, but this has been a huge impact to our household financially. It's been a huge impact mentally and emotionally. As a person who has lived at this address for 22 years, and until August 6th, I did not have waterfront property. I'm a parent of a teenager who is undergoing transition to a new high school under duress. So we have a lot of things going on in our household, and upending our household with a flood. And now the specter of another flood within the next month is pretty much devastating. And I think that that's been reflected in what my friends and neighbors have just said. So we definitely need that model updated. That's a midterm assistance with developing engineering solutions. And I think that it's highly likely that we will need more than one engineering solution to be enacted. In the very near term, we need flood fighting measures that can be enacted within the next 30 days. And on top of that, we need repair and maintenance to the stormwater conveyance system, which might have needed help before August 6th, but definitely took a hit because of that flood. We had a 10-foot hole behind our house where that storm drain junction was in the utility belt near the cemetery. So we need the model, and we need long-term engineering solutions in the near term. As my neighbor just said, we need help, and not just on an individual basis, on a collective basis.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony tonight. I saw a gentleman in the back stand up. Please sign in.
My name is, I'll sign in as soon as I'm done. My name is Jake Wade. My Tlingit name is Hinadai. That means knows where the river flows. So heed my words. This is something that that people aren't talking about enough. The entire valley is threatened by that glacier behind you. And I can't help but stare at that as I listen to everyone speak tonight. It's plain as day, and it engulfs this entire room and every one of your chairs. There's so much representing this moment in history. So, Juneau Chief. These are my neighbors, these are my community, as are you. I recognize every face. But this is our biggest test, and this will certainly be the biggest test any of you face in your jobs. So if you go to sleep tonight and there's a phone call that you didn't make, and if you go to sleep every night from here on out until there's a solution and there's a phone call or a connection that you didn't make, then it's not enough. And we'll keep trying. And I know these people will too, because I've seen them all walking across the street to neighbors' houses to see if they need help, if there's anything that they need, and we felt supported by them. So thank you. Let's feel supported by you. And yeah, make that call if you didn't, to whoever, so that we can come up with a solution. I can only imagine if there was oil or some kind of a mineral resource at risk, it would have already been solved, you know? And to think that, you know, it's just people. We're just people. And we're your people. Jonas Cheesh.
Thank you. Any questions? Perfect timing. Thank you for your testimony tonight. Come on up. Please sign in and state your name and area of town you live in for the record. And you have 3 minutes.
Thank you so much. My name is Chris Cart, and I live at 9229 Long Run Drive. And I would like to start off with a big thank you. All the help immediately was just so impressive and meant a lot. But a couple things. One is Steve Bradford is a good friend, and I think we need to heed his advice because he's a civil engineer that lived in the Riverside condos, and I have no idea how it happened, but on day 2, they had permits in their hands to drive bulldozers and tractors. Steve just took the reins and ran with it. They got dump truck drivers and Gene Cheeseman down there. I mean, in 3 days, there were trucks running constantly. And that's not happening now, probably because it wasn't this hanging event. But I believe 100% that if a civil engineer hadn't lived in that building and been on that condo board, that building would have been hanging for months and months, because they would have been looking for someone to come and help them. And that's not going to happen. And I think that sadly, we just need to face that fact. All you guys are doing a lot of stuff, but it's long-term stuff. So, you know, we've been looking online to see if we need barriers to come up and fold up, and know nothing about that at all. So I think that I would like the idea that maybe the city provide guidance. We might have to get 300 people to come together, but maybe we could bring some representatives up from some of these companies or something. I mean, I'm kind of reluctant to spend $35,000 to put a fence around our house and not know if it's going to work. Or fill the water balloons or, whatever the answers seem to be. Raise the house for 150,000. I mean, I don't know. But maybe there could be some sort of somebody that we can work with as a group and somebody on the assembly that could help facilitate maybe bringing some professionals here or something, because we are on our own. Nothing's going to happen, I don't think, in time for next year.
Thank you, Ms. Carter. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for testifying tonight.
Does anybody disagree with me? Please. No, that's what the FEMA guy said. I said, you guys, nothing's really going to happen. He came door to door with that group and he went, yeah, no, not really. So I think we need to get together. Sam? Yeah, okay, we'll do it.
Anybody else want to testify tonight? Seeing none, I think this is probably a good time to take a little break, so let's come back up to 10 after. Folks are welcome to carry on conversations, just please bring it out to the hallway. So moving on, we're to the consent agenda. Is there any public request for consent agenda changes other than ordinances for introduction? Seeing none. Assembly request for consent agenda changes. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move that we remove ordinance 2024-01 BC and ordinance appropriating $50,000 to the manager for Bartlett Regional Hospital Rainforest Recovery Center. That ordinance, I move that we pull that from the consent agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. So we will move that to new business.
Madam Mayor, just to clarify, that was for 500,000, not 50,000?
Yes, thank you. The third item from, well, yeah, item 3 from the consent agenda, yes, 50,000, 500,000, excuse me.
Any other assembly requests for agenda changes? All right, seeing none, assembly action will come back to you, Mr. Smith.
Madam Mayor, I move the consent agenda as amended and ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Seeing none, the consent agenda passes. So that brings us to public hearing. Item 15, Madam Clerk.
Madam Mayor, I think you want item number 18, first ordinance under public hearing. Is that accurate?
Oops, I am sorry. We're just so far down the agenda with the consent agenda that yes.
And did we need to take up consideration of the ordinance that Mr. Smith pulled from the consent agenda?
No, we're taking that up under new business.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this is ordinance 2024-20, an ordinance amending the parking requirements of the land use code by extending the no parking requirements area to include the Telephone Hill area.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Manager.
In 2022, the Assembly adopted a no parking required area in downtown Juneau to support residential and commercial development efforts. This ordinance would continue that policy and extend the no parking requirement to the telephone area for multiple reasons, including the following: construction cost of underground parking, availability of an adjacent parking garage, and the walkability of downtown Juneau. The Assembly Committee of the Whole supported this ordinance on April 15 and August 5, 2024. The Land, Housing, and Economic Development Committee supported this ordinance on July 15, 2024, and the Systemic Racism Review Committee reviewed this ordinance at its August 20, 2024 meeting. I recommend the Assembly hold public testimony and adopt this ordinance.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Any member of the public wish to speak to this ordinance? Seeing none, we will bring it to the Assembly. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the Assembly adopt ordinance 2024-20, amending the parking requirements of the Land Use Code, extending the no parking requirements area to include the Telephone Hill area, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I will remove my objection shortly. I just believe that if we are extending this no parking required zone into the Telephone Hill area with the idea of building new residence that people will live in, I think the downtown area is really congested with parking as it is, and so I think we really also need to pair this with thinking about options for improving our public transportation, with the improving, making it easier for people to get around downtown, people get to where they need to go. So I just think that we should, if we're going to be removing this requirement, that we should be thinking ahead and planning for the possible consequences. With that, I'll remove my objection.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. I'll object for purposes of a question. Madam Manager, will you remind me, was there any payment that people have to do for no parking in this zone? I don't believe so, but I just wanted to be sure.
No, the elimination of the no parking also removes the ability to pay for a parking spot, like pay to not have a parking spot, I should say.
All right, with that, I'll remove my objection. So we have a motion. Any objections? Seeing none, that motion passes. And just a note for the audience, you're welcome to stay here, but we're just going to march down our ordinances. Some of them have to do with flood, but we won't be talking anymore about the flood except for those ordinance. So you're always welcome to stay. Item 19, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2024-04, version B, large letter D. An ordinance appropriating $50,000 to the manager for a civic engagement and communications strategy, funding provided by general funds.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Manager.
This ordinance would appropriate $50,000 of general funds for City and Borough of Juneau communication strategy planning. Upon appropriation of funds, an RFP will be issued seeking a qualified consultant to provide professional strategic civic engagement and communications planning services. Systemic Racism Review Committee reviewed this ordinance at its August 2024 meeting and provided the following comment with respect to the ordinance. As the city moves forward with the creation of a civic engagement / communication strategy, the SRC strongly encourages staff and contractors to specifically and clearly include a strategy directed to traditionally marginalized communities in Juneau. The SRC intends to do its own review of CBJ protocols surrounding outreach to the various marginalized communities about optimizing boards and commission vacancies and involvement. The Assembly Finance Committee reviewed the request at its September 4, 2024 meeting.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Any member of the public wish to speak to this ordinance? Seeing none, we'll move it to the Assembly. Ms. Hughes-Candies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move that the Assembly adopt ordinance 2024-04BD, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection?
Madam Mayor, I'll object for a question, actually.
Ms. Hughes-Candies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Manager Kester, we've talked in the last meeting where you gave us outline of the dashes. Seeing SRRC's comments, I think that's a good one. Am I correct to think that this will be communicated with the contractor as you move forward with that?
Madam Manager.
Yes, I think that trying to reach groups that haven't traditionally been reached is probably one of the overarching goals of this. And we have received further feedback from members of the committee that, to be really specific and targeted in that plan. So we will communicate that to our contractor and view this project with that lens.
Fantastic. With that, I remove my objection.
All right, any further objection? Seeing none, that motion passes. Item 20, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2024-01, version B, large letter E. An ordinance appropriating $547,353 to the manager for the airport runway safety area shoulder grading capital improvement project. Funding provided by the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, Airport Improvement Program, AIP grant, and passenger facility charge fees.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Manager.
This ordinance would appropriate $574,000 for the design phase of the runway safety area plan shoulder grading CIP. The CIP is intended to regrade existing runway areas to Federal Aviation Administration specifications. Funding for the ordinance is provided by an FAA Airport Improvement Program grant in the amount of $422,000 and passenger facility charge fees in the amount of $125,000. The passenger facility charge funds will reimburse amounts that were forward funded from other sources, which is typical for passenger facility charge collections that are appropriated upon receipt. The Public Works and Facilities Committee Committee reviewed the request at its February 26th meeting. The Airport Board reviewed the request at the August 8th meeting, and the Systemic Racism Review Committee reviewed the ordinance at its August 20th meeting. I recommend the Assembly hold public testimony and adopt this ordinance.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Any member of the public wish to speak to this ordinance? Seeing none, we'll bring it to the Assembly. Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the Assembly approve ordinance 2024-01 BE, an ordinance appropriating $353 to the manager for the airport runway safety area shoulder grading capital improvement project, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Ms. Wall, and Ms. Watto, our airport manager, is here if we have questions. Any objection? Seeing none, that motion passes. Item 21, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2024-01, version B, large letter F. An ordinance appropriating $1,017,116 to the manager for the airport rescue and firefighting truck capital improvement project. Funding provided by the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration Airport Improvement Program Grant, Airport Revolving Funds, and Airport Funds.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Manager.
This ordinance would appropriate just over $1 million of Federal Aviation Administration Airport Improvement Program grant funds and $10,000 in local airport matching funds for the Airport Rescue and Firefighting ARF truck capital improvement project. This funding provides for the replacement of a 1993 ARF truck that was permanently taken out of service last year. Public Works and Facilities reviewed this request at the February 26th meeting. Airport Board reviewed the request at the August 8th meeting, and the Systemic Racism Review Committee reviewed the ordinance at its August 20th meeting. I recommend the Assembly hold public testimony and adopt this ordinance.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Is there any member of the public that wishes to speak to this ordinance? Seeing none, we'll move it to the Assembly. Walgett.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I move ordinance 2024-01 B, large letter F, and ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Seeing none, that motion passes. Item 22, Madam Clerk.
My apologies, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2024-01, version B, large letter J. An ordinance appropriating $35,025 to the manager for a grant to St. Vincent de Paul, funding provided by general funds.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Manager.
St. Vincent's de Paul's low-income housing at 345 Gastineau Avenue, 1801 Douglas Highway, 8619 Teal Street, and 231 Gastineau Avenue do not qualify for CVJ's low-income housing property tax exemption in 2024 because they did not submit their exemption application timely. As a result, property taxes cannot be exempted for 2024 and must be paid by St. Vincent's de Paul. This is an unanticipated financial burden for St. Vincent's de Paul. This grant would, in effect, acknowledge the intended low-income housing purpose of the 345 Gastineau Ave, 1801 Douglas Highway, 8619 Teal Street, and 231 Gastineau Ave properties, even though it did not meet the strict legal criteria to be exempted. The Systemic Racism Review Committee reviewed this ordinance at its August 20 meeting, and the Finance Committee reviewed the request at the September 4 meeting. I recommend the Assembly hold public testimony and adopt this ordinance.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Is there any member of the public that wishes to speak to this ordinance? Seeing none, we'll move it to the Assembly. Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the Assembly adopt ordinance 2024-01, version B, large letter J, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Seeing none, that ordinance passes. Okay, now that brings us to new business, and we have inserted ordinance 2024-01 BC. Madam Clerk, you want to read its title?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is An ordinance appropriating $500,000 to the manager for Bartlett Regional Hospital's Rainforest Recovery Center. Funding provided by general funds.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Manager.
This ordinance would appropriate $500,000 of general funds for the Rainforest Recovery Center at Bartlett Regional Hospital. This one-time funding will contribute towards Rainforest Recovery Center's operational deficit in the current fiscal year and ensure Bartlett can continue providing these services through June 30, 2025. Bartlett is actively working to transition services historically provided by Rainforest Recovery Center to Juneau Human Services effective in fiscal year 26. The Bartlett Regional Hospital Board of Directors reviewed this request at the June 25 and July 23 meeting. The Committee of the Whole reviewed this request at the July 15 meeting, and the Assembly Finance Committee reviewed this request at the September 4 meeting. I recommend the Assembly discuss this ordinance and direct staff on what you'd like to do with it, having pulled it from the consent agenda.
Thank you, Madam Manager. For the body, we can do several things with this. But I figured we'd probably discuss it. We can keep it introduced. We can pull it and not introduce it, or we can move it to committee. So with that being said, we also have Mr. Warner, who's our new CEO of BRH, and Ms. McDonald to ask questions as questions are needed. So what would the body like to do? Mr. Bryson.
Madam Mayor, if I could get this question answered first, this might help us. Is Rainforest Recovery open tomorrow or not? And if it is open tomorrow, is it closed at some point? Because I'm not certain if we're trying to fund an already closed business.
Who would like to answer that question? Mr. Warner. Okay, so the circumstances has changed. Would you bring us up to date?
To answer your question, just to start, Rainforest, currently we have 4 patients in-house, so Rainforest is open through the 23rd. We're actively discharging patients due to staffing shortages in the program. Shortly after the Assembly Finance Committee on the 4th, we had a resignation that brought back a staffing shortage for the program. This was kind of precipitated by the last 3 or 4 months as we've gone through the review of this program, whether it is core or non-core. We've had roughly 25% of the staff in RRC resign over that time. And so we've got to the point where we're no longer able to staff it in a safe manner and provide care adequately per the licensure.
Ms. Hughes-Candies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for that. So can you further, characterize what your staffing is for that program currently? You had a resignation, at least one, that made it so it can't be staffed safely, but were there multiple right after the meeting where this, if you could just paint the picture for me of what your staffing is right now and how it's recently changed?
Yeah. I'll take my best stab at it, and then I might have to pass it to Kim if you have more specific questions. So our staffing has kind of got to the point where we're using float staff from our labor pool in the hospital. So we have BHAs and MHU in the float pool and RRC. So we use those staff to help fill the holes in the program. But due to shortages on the hospital side and the requirement that we have to have BHAs in the mental health unit, we don't have as many staff to float over at this point. So with that last resignation, when we looked at the staffing that we did have on hand, we had several holes that we could not fill. So we went to our house supervisor, we went to our staffing committee, we looked at multiple different ways to try to staff this. Could we be innovative with different staff? Can we pull someone else, float people from different areas? And that's just for base staffing. So that doesn't include if someone calls in sick or someone wants a vacation. This is just what we have just left for staff. And so that's kind of what drove us to make the decision with the closure of the program.
Ms. Atkinson, and then Ms. Wall, and then back to you, Ms. Hughes-Candies. Oh, it is a follow-up. Go ahead.
No, I think that still is not specific enough for me, so I'm happy to wait in line because I think they might have questions for Mr. Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Warner. That helps me contextualize a little bit how we got here, but I guess I'm kind of focused on what needs to change, what we need to change to make sure that this transition happens. I know that now it seems to me we're on an accelerated timeline where Gastineau Human Services is going to have to take things a lot faster than they anticipated. What do you, or what does Gastineau Human Services, if you know, need from the Assembly now? What kind of support? Do you still need money? I don't know, I guess, what our next course of action ought to be.
I might have to pass that one to Kim for the transition plan that we've been
Okay.
working on.
Thank you. For the record, it's Kim McDowell. I remember this. Thank you. Could you repeat your question, please?
Yeah, absolutely. My question was, with the circumstances changing, but patients still need to be transitioned over to Gastineau Human Services, what do you or Gastineau Human Services need from the Assembly in terms of like monetary support, or just what's our next course of action here?
Go ahead, Ms. McDowell.
Thank you. So it's hard for me to speak for Gastineau, because they aren't here, so I don't want to speak for them. But I will say that all of the patients currently that are in the program at Rainforest will be discharged before the 23rd. So there won't be any actual patients to transfer to Gastineau until they'll be starting fresh with new referrals. I know in conversations with Gastineau, they did talk a little bit about needing some funding to move forward and to make the program bigger, and I'm not sure if they're planning on coming and ask the Assembly for that or not. I'm sure any financial support they could receive they'd be grateful for.
Follow up?
Thank you. My understanding was that there would be some partnership between Bartlett and Gastineau Human Services. I guess my question is that still the plan, and is there monetary support needed for that part of things?
Ms. McDonald?
Thank you. Yes, I think, so the partnership that we're talking about is in order for Gastineau to be able to provide similar services, they need kind of the medical oversight, if you will, and Bartlett's willing to provide that with one of our nurse practitioners who will go over, and we still have to figure out the details with that, if the patients would come to us, if she would go over there to see those patients, but that's kind of the arrangement that we had, and then our practitioner would bill through Bartlett for those services. So again, I can't speak to what funding sources or what money Gastineau would want or need. I would assume that they would need some support as they're kind of taking on a program that they didn't plan on taking on until 2026, which was my understanding.
Ms. Wall?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm not sure who this question's for, but I'd love to hear, I hear the comments about not having enough staff in this current moment. If someone could walk me through how we got from not having enough staff in this current moment to closing the program permanently, that would be helpful, because just speaking on behalf of myself, when we made that vote in committee, after many meetings of conversation, we were not intending to make a decision to close Rainforest Recovery with that vote. And so I just want to make sure nothing that we did resulted in that, because if that's the case, then that was not our intent as I understood it.
Ms. McDonald?
Thank you. So I think that when you have any period of uncertainty, especially for staff, they have to make what decisions is best for their families. I think we saw this with ABA program. We saw this with our crisis program. I think we had staff kind of hanging on, waiting to see kind of what the end result was going to be of the September 4th meeting. And I think when they saw that the kind of directive was, here's, $500,000, and then to work with GCS or GHS, pardon me, people decided that they needed to move on and look for different work. And so we were already sort of strapped for staffing. Since June, we've had 9 resignations in that area in Rainforest. And so we've been barely being able to kind of staff it as is. Part of that staffing was some of our counselors and our program managers would step in and serve as a BHA. And since during this time, those 2 people have also resigned. So the extra people that we've had to kind of fill in and fit those roles to help provide support for the patients aren't there. And so while I don't think it was anybody's intent to go through, it certainly wasn't our intent. I will say that speaking on behalf of myself and senior leadership, this was not an easy decision. We did spend some time between the 4th and the 12th talking to staff, trying to get a feel. We all met as a group with the staffing office and at the organization to see, could we pull staff, what was available, what could we ask from staff? And it just became very clear that people, they have mortgages to pay and they have bills to pay and they have to do what's best for them. And so with the staffing already being so tenuous, when we got the ninth resignation, it tipped the scale to where we weren't going to be able to provide safe staffing for that. Unlike our normal like inpatient areas for like med surg and CCU, we can pull like resource and tasking nurses to help with that because of the nature of the program at Rainforest, where it requires a counselor and BHAs and intensive therapies and running groups. That's way out of the scope of anything really else that we can pull from. And so we found ourselves in a situation where, could we try to find staffing here and then maybe in 2 days have staffing? We could do that, but then what are we going to do in the meantime? We're going to have, patients there with no support, and we just can't do that. It's not safe for them or for our staff. And so while, the optics kind of look, like, oh, you gave us money, now we're closing it. If we could have kept it open till January 6th, we would have loved to do that. Or do that transition time. We actually had a big conversation with the staff, said, do you have any other alternative staffing plans? Can we look at anything different? And no matter which way we worked it, it was just not gonna work. And so that's kind of where we had to make that decision to make sure, first and foremost, that the patients had a plan and a safe plan of discharge, and that we weren't just waiting to the very last minute to say, okay, sorry, you have to go back home and no support. And that was really important for us to make sure we planned for that. And in order for that to happen, we ended up having to close the program with that date. So we made sure the patients were taken care of and had a safe disposition.
Ms. Hughes Candies?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I jotted down a few things, but maybe I'll restate my question because I heard 9 resignations, I think, since June. So I guess my question is, some number of resignations got to where it was not safe to run the program anymore. How many was that, and when did those happen? And then I think I understand the 9 since June, but if this is some subset of June, please let me know that.
Ms. McDonald?
Thank you for that. Yes, so actually the 9th resignation we received, which was the day after the September 4th meeting, is what tipped the scales for us.
Understood.
If I can add to, the other thing that made this challenging is we were really unable to post or try to fill any positions because we don't want to bring, new employees in and then say, okay, and here's your 30-day layoff. And so a lot of that, we decided not to fill those positions because, for one, people weren't applying, but for two, if we could get somebody interested, they weren't going to be interested for a short period of time, and with the uncertainty of the program, knowing if they're going to have a job or not.
Understood. Thank you.
All right, you guys have asked lots of questions down there. Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I guess my question is, do you have an estimate of how much Bartlett has spent on rainforest recovery so far this fiscal year up until it will be closed? Anyway, as we're evaluating whether or not to provide these funds. That might be a Mr. Warner question, but.
Mr. Water? Go ahead.
So through the month of August, the program had already lost $308,000. So that was for the first 2 months of operation in the fiscal year. So with the closure of the program impending, we're discharging patients. So we're seeing revenue erode quickly in the program while we're trying to keep those staff that we gave resignation notices to. We have to honor that through the end of the 30-day period. Some of the way our layoff rules work, we're keeping a lot of those additional staff through the 26th of October, just to make sure we're following the union rules as they are. So we anticipate, I don't have firm numbers for you, but that gets us through staffing, and then we have closing process for the building as well. So we have to clean out the building, we have drugs, we have to inventory, we have equipment, we have to inventory, and then move out. So I anticipate the losses to be well in excess of the 500,000, if that was your question.
Thank you. And I'm not sure who this question is for, but I'm going to ask one. So you said all the patients will be discharged on the 23rd. Have they completed their program, or is this a hastened discharge?
Thank you for that question. The 4 remaining patients, it's my understanding that one of them will complete the program by the 23rd, and then the other 3 have plans in place to go to other areas that provide that service. I reached out to those facilities and explained kind of why they weren't going to be completing our program, because some of it was completing our program was contingent on them going to this other place. But my understanding from working with the case managers in the cases that everybody has a disposition will be able to go and complete their program where they're going. And I think that's a total of 3 patients.
All right, Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Ms. McDowell and Mr. Warner for being here. This is a follow-on from Mr. Smith's question. Mr. Warner, you talked about the losses that the program has incurred, but you have funding for an entire fiscal year. And so I think what the Assembly is trying to figure out is this additional $500,000 necessary, because there's a lot of fiscal year left where you won't be doing anything with the program?
Go ahead.
I'm going to take a shot at the question. So funding for the program is driven by patient revenue. So when we don't have any more patients, the revenue goes away. So when I'm speaking to losses, it's losses incurred through the length of the program for the patients we have now, in addition to closing. Does that answer your question?
Ms. Hale?
Thank you, Mr. Warner. It may be that there's not a neat little answer to my question, so that's fine for now.
Mr. Bryson, and then Ms. Hughes-Candies.
I might need a little bit of a history reminder. I thought when we discussed this to the cow, that was the information that came out, that there was no amount of funding that could keep Rainforest open because the attrition. That's why I was surprised that the September 4th moved this. I'm going to be curious to look at the minutes. I thought that had been some of the information that came out. Is that not accurate? You guys were trying to figure out a way to keep Rainforest open all the way through September 4th?
Mr. Warner?
Our plan after the September 4th meeting was to keep the program open through January 6th.
Ms. Hughes-Candies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Usually we have asked a lot of questions, and I don't know, maybe people have more, but you referenced a variety of ways we could go for this, and we pulled this off the consent agenda tonight. I would move that the Assembly sends this back to the Finance Committee, and maybe there's room on the Finance Committee tomorrow, or sorry, Wednesday. And we could get in.
Could you hold your motion until we're done with questions? I'll come to you for a motion.
Yes, ma'am.
Anybody have any other questions? I have one. Is Gas and Human Services ready to accept patients at this time? I know you're speaking for another agency. I apologize.
Thank you for that. I actually do know the answer. They are ready to, probably mid-October, they can open up 4 beds. And then in January, probably open up the other 4. They had agreed to at 8 for 8.
And they're going to do it at 3.1, correct, facility?
It's going to be 3.1-ish. So it'll have, they're already doing 18 hours. 3.1 is 18 hours of therapy. A 3.5 requires 20. So they're doing 18, and then they'll have the medical oversight from one of our nurse practitioners.
Okay, Ms. Hale, you're just waving your arms around, but you don't have a question. Any other questions? All right, Ms. Hughes-Candies, go for it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would move that the Assembly send this ordinance back to the Finance Committee to be picked up on Wednesday. And I would ask for unanimous consent.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. This would be a question for the attorney. Would we have enough notice to be able to add something to the Finance Committee meeting agenda by Wednesday if we chose to do so today?
Yes,
Madam Attorney, although I don't think this is for your question because you don't come up with the agendas, but.
That is correct, Madam Mayor, but it is my understanding that there's enough time and there's enough notice.
Yeah. And we may have already added it in anticipation of this conversation. So sorry, Madam Chair, but you can kill it if you want. Anyway, any objections to that motion? So keep it in mind, this will not be introduced tonight. This is just going back to committee. Okay, everybody's clear on that? Any objection? Seeing none, that motion passes, so that ordinance will go back to the Finance Committee. Thank you guys for being here, Chad. Okay, that brings us to item 23. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is hardship and senior citizen, disabled veteran, nonprofit, late filed real property tax exemption applications.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Manager.
There are 13 property owners that have requested the Assembly authorize the assessor to consider a late filed exemption for their property assessment. The Assembly should consider each request separately and determine whether the property owner was unable to comply with the April 30 filing requirement, state statute, and city code. The burden of proof is upon the property owner to show the inability to file a timely exemption request. If the Assembly decides to accept one or more late filed exemption requests, those applications will be referred to the assessor for review and action. I recommend the Assembly act on each of these applications individually.
Thank you, Madam Manager. We'll bring this to the Assembly. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We have considered each of these individually, and I move that the Assembly adopt and accept the hardship and senior citizen, disabled veteran, nonprofit, and late filed property tax exemption. And I ask that we accept all of these, and I ask for unanimous.
Could you read the names, please?
Oh,
So that
terribly
means
sorry.
we've done them individually.
The name John Matheson, Luis Hernandez, Kurt Milnes, Fred Wiley, Marvin Picote, Michael Estad, Scott Bloom, Andrew Massey, Rita George, Barbara Hyde, and Richard Hoffman. I ask that the Assembly accept these exemptions and ask for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Any objection? Mr. Kelly.
Just to clarify, all we're doing is by accepting these exemptions, we're just authorizing the assessor to consider the late filed exemption.
Correct.
All right, I will remove my objection then.
All right, seeing no objection, they will go back to the assessors. All right, item 24, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is notice of appeal number 2024-AA01, Haley Duran versus Planning Commission regarding PWP 2004-0003.
All right, is this for you, Madam Attorney, or Madam Manager? Madam Manager.
In accordance with CBJ 1.5 appeal procedures, the Assembly must decide whether to accept or reject this appeal. If you determine, after liberally constructing the notice of appeal in order to preserve the rights of the appellant, that there has been a failure to comply with the appellate rules, or if the notice of appeal does not state grounds upon which any of the relief requested may be granted, you may reject the appeal. If the Assembly rejects the appeal, the Assembly may consider returning the filing fee. If the appeal is accepted, you must decide whether the Assembly will hear the appeal itself or if it will assign the appeal to a hearing officer. If you decide to hear the appeal yourselves, a presiding officer should be appointed. In hearing an appeal, the Assembly would sit in its quasi-judicial capacity and must avoid discussing the case outside the hearing process. See City Code on Impartiality. The City Attorney recommends the Assembly reject this appeal as it does not state grounds upon which any of the relief requested may be granted. Ms. Duran has failed to provide information that meets any of the three stated grounds for appeal. Even taking the information provided by Ms. Duran in the light of most favorable to her, there are no legal or factual errors presented by Ms. Duran. If the Assembly rejects the appeal, I recommend that the Assembly return Ms. Duran's filing fee. And I do know that the attorney, Ms. Lane, is here to answer specific questions.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Thank you, Madam Attorney. We will bring it to the Assembly. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move that we reject the appeal from Ms. Duran and return Ms. Duran's filing fee.
Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I would. I guess, actually, I did have a question, actually, if I may ask. If we reject the appeal, may Ms. Duran resubmit an appeal, possibly reapply, excuse me, and maybe with, having better understood the process. Anyway, can she reapply with other objections that may meet, code requirements?
Madam Attorney.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and Assemblymember Smith. Yes, there's no bar on, she doesn't have to wait a certain period of time. She could go reapply tomorrow.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly.
Just a follow-up, because I had a similar question to Mr. Smith. Is there a deadline when she must apply? Is there a certain amount of time after the decision where she is no longer able to resubmit?
Madam Attorney.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Assemblymember Kelly, that's a great question. She can reapply a whole new application for a parking waiver at any point after the Assembly rejects it, should you choose to reject it. So whether that's next week, next month, tomorrow, it's up to her.
Ms. Hughes-Candy's them as well.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A question also for the attorney. This was one that I went a little bit randomly into the weeds looking at the testimony from the Planning Commission because some of the testimony caught my eye. And I'm wondering, and sometimes what the Planning Commission does catches my eye in a not so great light because I think, what is the Planning Commission up to over there? And this might be one of those cases. So our stated grounds, could you speak to, because I don't know them off the top of my head, do you know, are they short enough to say what they are?
Yes.
Go ahead, Madam Attorney. Good question.
They are in the packet. I just have to
sorry.
to them. And it's listed on the appeal form.
Okay.
So it's kind of a cheat sheet when you're filing an appeal. It's like, here are the three choices for you, and one of them is that there's no substantial evidence. One of them is there's no the written record is not, the written decision is no good, and then there's a third one. And so when Attorney Wright was analyzing this, she was looking at those three, and it is page 76 in the packet. It's not supported by substantial evidence, not supported by adequate written findings, and the agency failed to follow its own procedures or didn't follow due process. And in looking at her notice of appeal, there's just not enough there to fit into any of those categories.
Understood. Okay. So if the Planning Commission made a decision based on something that they're not supposed to use to make a decision on, that would fall under, they didn't follow their own process?
Madam Attorney.
Thank you. Yes, that would fall under that. Or if they didn't provide enough information in their notice of decision, that would also fall under that.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And we as the Assembly, to follow on Ms. Hughes-Candy's train of thought here, we as the Assembly can't do anything unless someone appeals under those terms. So if we thought that was the case, we don't have a tool to change the Planning Commission's decision if we felt like they went outside of these criteria.
Madam Attorney.
Thank you. That is correct. There's no other way to remand it back to the Planning Commission to have them relook at this or make a different decision without an appeal and without accepting the appeal, which is a lengthy process.
Ms. Wall.
And are we able to encourage Mr. Rand to reapply? Is that an action we can take? Okay, maybe after we make this motion, we can make that motion, just because my understanding is this was a 3-3 decision of the planning commission, and she's asking for more committee members to be there. It seems like reapplying is probably the best way to get to the outcome she wanted, and we might want to. So I'll stop.
And I'll just speak briefly to the motion. You're exactly right, Ms. Wall, but the easiest thing is for her to reapply than to go through this appeal process. And right now, she doesn't have any basis for us to accept appeal. So, Mr. Smith.
Mayor, I think maybe by using that term reapply, it answers my question, but throughout the packet, it does say appeals must be filed, 20 days from the date the decision is filed. But if someone is reapplying, does that timeline not, anyway, is there an extension? Anyway, does that timeline not apply or something, or how does that work?
Madam Attorney.
Thank you. Great question. So, Ms. Duran would be putting in a brand-new application for her parking waiver. So there's no 20 days, there's no deadline, so she's not gonna resubmit an appeal. She would need to resubmit just a brand-new application, like starting fresh, and then that would go to the commission, probably rather quickly, because CDD has all the information. A decision would be made, and then she would be able to appeal if she didn't like that decision.
Okay, we have a motion. Any objection? Seeing none, that motion is approved, and we will return Ms. Duran's filing fee. Okay, with that, we will go to staff reports.
Madam Mayor,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ms. Hale.
Madam Mayor, if you don't mind, I would like to leave the meeting now. I'm pretty worn out here, recovering from my surgery.
All right, sorry, Ms. Wall, I'll go back to you. I don't know that we need a motion. We could just tell her. Yes, we will put that on Madam Attorney.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Good night, Ms. Hale. Recover well. And Madam Clerk, did we lose Wahogadoc too? She does not show it. She said she was having sketchy service, so. All right. So we're down 2. So with that, we will go to staff reports, item 25.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I will keep this very brief because I did send out a public service announcement with all of the information I was going to cover, but I did want to draw everyone's attention that the ballots for the municipal election have been mailed out as of last week. People have started to receive them, vote them, and even return them. Today was the first day that our vote centers were open, and we have 2 vote centers, one located right here in the Assembly Chambers, and the other vote center is located at the Mendenhall Library. We have deployed 5 ballot drop boxes this year. In the past, we only had 2, so now we have one at AEL&P, and they have graciously allowed us to use their area to host a ballot drop box. We have one located here at City Hall on the corner, across from Marine Park, one located at the Douglas Library, one located at the Mendenhall Valley Public Library just outside our Mendenhall Valley vote center, so that people don't have to wait in line just to return a ballot. They can just go right to the curb, return it in the ballot drop box, and especially on election day when we have hundreds of people coming through the vote center, this will save a lot of time and a lot of lines. And then we also have the one out at Statter Harbor boat launch parking lot. And that is not the parking lot where the harbor office is located, but the boat launch parking lot. And I'm happy to answer any questions that the Assembly might have related to the process of our municipal election.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you, Madam Clerk.
Thank you.
Okay, next we will have Title 49 Land Use Code rewrite. Madam Clerk, Madam Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm super excited to have this staff report in your packet. It is authored by our Title 49 Project Manager, Ram Dumichel, in the back there. I wanted to have someone to share this long meeting with me. But it's really exciting because he's had over a month now to dig and just solely look at our code and meet with stakeholders and meet with individuals. And he's mapped out a plan for our Title 49 rewrite. That starts with kind of a phase one. You'll see it mapped out on here. The things that like we as a city started but never finished, the things that are clearly stated in all of our plans, kind of process improvements, things that can make CDD more efficient. And that's phase one. And then phase two, that's kind of more transformational, will coexist with the public process, will coexist with the comprehensive plan. So really planning some of that public outreach together. There's also in this packet, in this memo, information on the kind of flow, the workflow as it moves from, bringing the proposed Title 49 changes to the review committee that will be appointed this evening, then to the assembly to get buy-in, then through a public comment process back to the assembly for adoption. So lots of really good information in here, really excited about hitting the ground running on that process. And I or Mr. Dumichel are happy to answer any questions that you have.
Any questions for anybody? Oh, I don't look that way anymore. So, okay. Thank you, Mr. Dumichel, and thank you, Madam Manager.
Madam Mayor, a question for you.
I'm sorry?
I have a question for you.
Okay.
That was staff reports.
Now we're on to assembly reports.
Okay.
Now we're on to the mayor's report.
Which will be now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. Since we just talked about Title 49, we'll talk about the Title 49 Task Force. And yes, I can't count, and there is a 7-member committee instead of a 5-member committee, so I'll take that one. This is, and I had to check with Madam Clerk on this one. The committee will work until the work is done, so that's why it's a committee, not a task force, because it doesn't have a deadline. And we try to get people that would help Mr. Dumichel. So we have an assembly liaison, Mr. Smith, thank you very much, who's also chair. Planning Commission liaison, Juneau Chamber of Commerce representative, Clayton Ohio Regional Housing Authority representative, and representative of the building trades, and two community developers, I should say. So, and you can see the proposed members. The Planning Commission is Mandy Cole, who's our chair of our Planning Commission, if you didn't know. Proposed member from the Juneau Chamber of Commerce is Maggie McMillan, who is their executive officer. And the proposed member for the Clinton Ohio Regional Housing Authority is Lorraine Diaz's. I don't know her title, I have to say, but that's who Ms. Peta, who's in charge of that number, gave us that name, I'm sorry. And the proposed member from the building trades is Corey Baxter. And the two proposed members from the development community are Rich Harris and Bill Human. And like I said, this is an advisory committee, so it's to provide advice to the manager's office and the assembly and to advance a rewrite of Title 49 CBJ's land use code. And I don't know that I need to continue reading this any further, because I think everybody's got a copy and we try to get this out early enough so people could do it. Apologize for the late thing that it's happened today, but it's been a little hectic around City Hall lately. So any questions? Go ahead. It's you, Candy, so I'll make the city manager answer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It is for the city manager, so fear not. So I am very excited, Mr. Duhamel is here, and I'm very excited by the phasing as described in this project, and that we have people specifically focused on it. And my recollection of how we talked about this last time the city manager was getting us excited was that we'll have these people as kind of steering committee, sounding board throughout the project, but at no point a break. And the manager's office would know what priorities and what things have been lingering. And so as I look at phase one, the committee's tasks, the review and recommend sections, as I'm looking at 1A, my question to the manager is, where are the planners and CDD and the staff and the manager's office and Rob in that? My fear is that, this is like a bunch of people, same old status quo. And so I would rather know that it's coming from, we know what the problems are and we hired someone to go fix them. And they can see it on the way to us, but they're not the ones coming up with it. Does that make sense?
Madam Manager, I'm having a little difficulty understanding your question.
Okay, I'll boil it down, or she can take a crack at it. I can't tell.
Yeah, I think I understand the question. I have certainly, when I've spoke about my vision, the world according to Katie, for this committee, it has been a working committee that can help Mr. Dumichel, who's not from Juneau, bounce ideas off of, get feedback, really, do some of that more strategic work before we bring a product to the assembly to get buy-in from the assembly and then have some public process on it. And I still foresee that happening. So we, as we design this committee, want to make sure that the committee, for example, doesn't have veto authority. So the committee wouldn't be able to say, no, you can't bring that idea to the assembly. And I think that is cared for with the words review and evaluate, but certainly if stronger language would be useful, that only helps us with that intention.
I think, okay, thank you for that answer. I think, in the world according to Katie, as long as it's operating that way, I don't really care to wordsmith this. I just want reassurance that that is the flow and that it's only an aid, but that we don't have an idea where manager's office says, go do this, or CDD says, this is what we want you to work on. And then it's met with, actually, this is what the chamber and the development committee thinks you should work on. And then it just again, and I know we all know what I'm talking about. It's just we never get anywhere. So if you feel confident that this is just another way of saying that, then I don't have any problems with it.
Well, the beautiful thing about a committee is you can always change its direction midstream if you have to. So, yeah, no, that's a good expression, and we all know where you're coming from on that. That's for sure. So, Mr. Smith, I'll have you make the motion to accept that. Oh, sorry, Ms. Wall, I didn't see that.
This is a question for you, Madam Mayor. And I should understand this better, but there's been a lot of moving pieces on the chamber. The chamber has restructured their housing and I think their housing committee recently. And I seem to recognize 4 names here, all of whom are involved in that committee in some way, I believe, and it makes me a little, and I have no problem with these names, but if they are meeting separately as a subcommittee, I don't know if you know anything about both. I actually wasn't even thinking of Open Meetings Act, but I was just thinking kind of, that might not make the committee work well, but I'm also thinking about Open Meetings Act.
Okay, thank you for that. So these are where I picked some of these people just straight out. So Ms. McMillan is not in charge of that committee. That's Mr. Dahl. So that's why I didn't pick Mr. Dahl. I picked her because we should have a member of the chamber that committee can report to. I don't know that Corey Baxter is part of that committee. So we will make sure that he is not. If he is, Mr. Harris is choosing this committee rather than that committee. So, and I don't think Bill Human is part of that committee either. So, because it has been restructured. So, but we will make sure that they understand that they are not to be on that committee because we don't want jumping fences back and forth. So they'll have to choose. That would be my intention. And if they want to stay on the other one, we'll find other names which will run by the assembly. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move that the Assembly accept the proposed ad hoc Title 49 rewrite advisory committee as proposed, and
With the amendment of 7 members instead of 5.
with the amendment of 7 members instead of 5 in the first line of the first paragraph, and then I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Seeing none, that committee is appointed. Okay, that brings us to the City and Borough of Juneau Short-Term Rental Task Force, and I'm gonna take a little bit of blame on this one. Unfortunately, right when we were doing this, things happened in my life, and then we had a flood. So it's taken me a little long time, and Mr. Barr, I can thank him for continuing to gently poke at me, so it's done now. So on this particular committee, it's a lot of members, but we are trying to actually get a community, this is a community task force. So it's very similar to the Visitor Industry Task Force that had a lot of members. Mr. Bryson has agreed to act as chair. And so what I did with this one is I picked people, when I talked to them, pro, con, neutral. And then on the advice of Mr. Barr, I also put some people that were good analytical thinkers and good with numbers, because we're gonna have to deal with numbers. And so that's where Milani Shivens is and Ryan, I can't say his last name, Kozlarek come from. So I'm not gonna tell you who's pro and who's con, because all of them agree that they would be objective. So that's where all these people came from. Anyway, the other 2 assembly members are Ms. Hughes Scandies and Mr. Smith. So appreciate those 2 volunteering for this one. So again, my idea on this one is to look at the number of short-term rentals, and I know we've had some entities already do this for us, so it won't be us going out to count necessarily. It'll be looking at reviewing some of their studies already, and then conduct a review of what other people are doing. And then have at least 2 public forum meetings, because when we talked about this, we obviously had public concern about this. And then my idea, the Assembly can do it too. The task force, if this isn't working right, can come up. But my idea was a matrix that the committee, and I tried not to put words in any mouths or set it up for anything, but basically, we're comfortable with this amount, so we're going to do nothing to, oh no, there's a problem, we need to heavily regulate, and anywhere in between. And the idea would be this matrix would then live on, and so if, as things changed, ebbed and flowed, as I should say, then we wouldn't have to keep revisiting this, and we would have a matrix in place. So anyway, this one is a task force because we're giving them till March 31st, which is roughly 5-6 months, because we figure that's probably about the meetings they'll need. And then this task force would stop. So any questions on this one? And Mr. Barr is going to staff this one. Ms. Euskadis.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have, I'll start with a question, but I also have plenty of comments on this one, so tell me when you're ready for those as well. I guess my question would be for Manager Kester, let me know if I should direct all these to you. So as to the tasks for the committee to accomplish, number 1 is conduct a review of the number of short-term rentals and evaluate their effect on the housing in Juneau. We pay a company to track the numbers for us. So in terms of conducting a review, we already have the numbers that we get from the software, imperfect though it is, and for those who have been participating in the registration program. So I guess I would ask from staff's perspective, or let me know if that should be you, Madam Mayor, how that's not just doing the same thing, I guess.
One of us.
Whoever wants to take that.
It wasn't my intention to redo that, so I would accept any wordsmithing you have for that, but mainly it was to look at the data that we have. Because not only do we pay for it, I know Raincoast Data has also done studies on this, and I believe JEDC has done studies on this, so
they
have. I compare and evaluate, maybe it might be a better way to put it. So help me wordsmith.
Okay, no, thank you for that. No, and I think you're going to find my issue is not the wordsmithing, it's the task itself. So that sounds to me like a redundant action because we have other people who have conducted, including ourselves and including JEDC, have conducted a review with some attempt to evaluate their effect on the housing in Juneau. And if someone else wants to take a stab on it, that's fine.
The reason I worded it this way, and Madam Manager can do it, is just because I knew that there was at least 3 entities doing it, so I guess I just looking at, is we want to look at that information from 3, and that's why I meant by conduct a review. So like I said, if you have better words, I would be happy to do it. My thing wasn't to go out and count the number, but we have 3 different studies, so you're gonna have to look at those 3 different studies and evaluate how those work together or separately for that matter, so.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate knowing the mindset behind that. I have comments on this, but I'll wait and see if others have questions.
Okay, Mr. Smith.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I know you mentioned that the people listed, were either for or opposed, and I appreciate you're not sharing who. Is there anything you can share with us about like some of their backgrounds, just briefly on some of these folks, if you don't mind?
Yep. Sure. So Eric Peterson is on your planning commission, if you didn't know that. Dan Coleman is operator. Melania, I've already talked about. Patty Collins, when we first talked about this, I don't know if you remember in your email, she sent us lots of emails about studies and that kind of stuff, so I figured I would bring her in there. Joyce Nevin is one of the Tlingit Hideout Regional Housing suggested her for this. Carol Train was very interested in this when she was on the assembly. Ryan, I'm sorry, I'm killing his name, Kozlarek is, like I said, Mr. Barr suggested him because he's a IT guy and very into analytic thinking. And Adam Dordia is another operator of short-term rentals. Ms. Hughes, Scatties, go for it. Oh, Ms. Wall, okay.
Okay. Well, I want to start by saying thank you for taking a crack at this because I do want to say that because it's hard to thread the needle. And I do think that you've done your best to get everybody to the table. So I do appreciate that. I went back after work and before tonight to watch the April 15th meeting where we decided to have a task force so I could refresh myself with kind of what we said there and where we were coming from. In that, we talked about task force light, and we also talked about really, I think what the consensus was, what I heard among the assembly members was to bring the community along so that regulations were not imposed upon the public, that we had more public buy-in, and that we allowed for, I'm going to say non-traditional, that we might engage in some alternative engagement strategies where you would have like community meetings or something where we could talk with the operators and they could express their concerns, not in a chair for 3 minutes, maybe it's a community. So we talked about things like that. And we had even talked about just doing 2 meetings versus this gives them a charge to conduct 2 meetings themselves and several months to do it. So starting from what I heard, I'm trying to find what are those consensus points we have, because you knew that at the outset I was kind of a skeptic to do another task force because I felt like it was an extra step. But I acknowledge the wisdom of my colleagues that, it is very important to bring the community along. I think one of my biggest issues with this is it's very easy to know where someone is coming from if they have 26 rentals, that's you've got your cred, that you are gonna, it's gonna affect your pocketbook. It's harder to do that when it's someone who can't find a place to live or who moved out of town and someone might say, oh, I'm fairly neutral to the topic, but you don't have that similar balance and you can't really prove your credentials there. So what I feel like, and I think you, like I said, I think you've done a good job of trying to paint the spectrum. But when I look at these charges, I feel like we're farming out the very public policy making that we are elected to do. And sometimes it's short-term rentals are like a slippery thing that it's hard to get our arms around in a good way. And I think it's okay to get creative and, do some public meetings and engage with the people we're trying to make policy about. But I don't think it's a good idea to say, we're almost making like a mini assembly here and then saying, you guys come up with the solution. Where's our job? That's our hard job. And so when I'm reading these charges, as far as public forum meetings, I think that should be coming to all of us. As far as creating metrics or creating the recommendations for what we should put in place, I think we can bring community members to do it with us, but I think that's got to be us. And I think even number 4, just the language in number 4 and what it seeks to do is 1 member's, this is what we should be doing. It's not 9 members saying this is what we should be doing for short-term rentals. And we haven't ever gotten that far, and we put up this block. So I think those are my main comments, and I'll stop there.
All right, Ms. Wall and then Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I feel like this charge, it needs some work from my perspective as well. I agreed with some of what Ms. Hughes-Gandy said, but I think maybe my feedback's a little different. I like the idea of a committee that is reviewing regulatory options and creating a matrix of what may or may not work in our community. Where I am challenged here is when I didn't go back and listen to our meeting, but I remember why I suggested it was my understanding was that the consensus on this body was that we believed that there was an effect of short-term rentals on housing. Some of us thought it was huge and some of us thought it was small, but we wanted to do something and we wanted to come up with a solution to regulating that the community was going to be on board with. And so when I read this 4, it looks like we're asking this committee to say yes or no. And I think we're already at yes. We want them to help us craft what that looks like to help our housing crisis. So I'll stop there. And I want to echo my thanks for the work, even if I think it needs a little bit more work.
We can certainly give it more work. And I didn't want to throw you under the bus, but yes, as I recall that meeting, Ms. Wall suggested we do a task force. So that's what I did because the body agreed on a task force. So that's what I tried to do with the matrix, and we can certainly get together and wordsmith some more. But Mr. Bryson.
So Madam Mayor, my recollection of that meeting is the same, that we were suggesting that a task force, and I saw task force as a way to bring the community along, the same way that we did childcare task force, the same way we did the visitor industry task force. The visitor industry task force, I would say visitor industry is as large a topic and as controversial a topic as housing. You talk about visitor industry, people have very strong opinions about that. And we were able to use a swath of the community that had all spectrums, the same way that Madam Mayor tried really hard to get a broad swath of spectrum of opinions and of different mindsets. So I kind of saw this committee as bringing like really good recommendations to the assembly and doing a lot of the legwork so that we could dive deep into the weeds of short-term rentals and the impact on housing. And while I know that some people are concerned about the matrix, being able to say, this is where we're at, this level might have these much more effects if this was happening in the community. So we'd be able to not only provide some guidance that like the Visitor Industry Task Force provided, but we could prevent some future headaches from assemblies by saying, hey, once the mark hit random number 5% of housing population, we can bring in more heavy-handed regulations. And I'm just spitballing here because we haven't even looked at what the possibilities are. Could we do this work on the assembly level? Yeah, but as today proved, as the topics come up, we have a lot of legwork to do up here. So allowing a committee that has a huge spectrum of the community to give us some really good outcomes or some good options of what we could do as an assembly, I was hoping that that would be in a similar fashion to the Visitor Industry Task Force, which we've then spent the last 4 years implementing those things, which housing implementation would be something that we would do over a long period. So I saw this in the very same category as that, in bringing the community along and having the community's input along with it. So thank you for the time, Madam Mayor.
Certainly. Any other comments? What is the will of the body? Totally open on this one, just so you know. If you know me at all, people can, I don't have any ownership on any word or anything else. Do we want to, I'm just looking for nods. Do we want to continue working on this, bring it back next meeting, or do we ready to pass? It looks like the nods are bringing it back to, okay, so Ms. Hughes-Scanny and Ms. Wall, you get thrown under the bus to help.
Comment, Madam Mayor?
Mr. Bryson.
While I appreciate the Assembly's desire to have lots of comment and really be able to debate this, we have 7 members of the community that are kind of expecting to be on this committee, and so how much delay do we want as we've kind of already reached out and kind of have begun this process? I'd hate for it to put a delay that's not necessary on this. Thank you.
I appreciate the sentiment, Mr. Bryson, but I personally rather have them have really clear charges that the Assembly is going to get information from. They'll understand. Mr. Kelly and then Ms. Atkinson, you're gonna, okay.
Thanks. So by bringing this up at the next meeting, are we talking about the next regular meeting when the assembly has reorganized, or are we talking about the special committee meeting or special assembly meeting?
We're talking about the regular assembly meeting, and one of you may be bringing it up for me.
Thank you.
So on October 21st. All right, with that, I will move on with my mayor's report. Thank you guys for all your time. And the only one thing I wanted to call out is I went to the Filipino community board meeting and dinner on Saturday, and they had done their scholarship committee, and they gave $18,000 to kids for in scholarships. So I just wanted to acknowledge that because that was pretty impressive. So with that, I will conclude my mayor's report because I had lots to say and didn't have to. So Ms. Hale is gone, so we have no committee of the whole. Ms. Wall, Finance.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. All right. So Finance Committee met 2 weeks ago. We forwarded 3 ordinances related to BRH, 2 of which were introduced tonight, one that was sent back to the Finance Committee. We also talked about the strategic communication appropriation that was passed tonight, and the St. Vincent de Paul property tax exemption that was also passed tonight. On Wednesday, we will be kicking off with an update from Eagle Crest, a good memo in your packet on where things are at with Eagle Crest's finances and the gondola. So come with your questions about that project. We will be talking about potential deappropriations associated with flood response. And now we will be continuing to talk about the appropriation that was set aside for Bartlett related to rainforest recovery. I think that's it.
And I think it's at a special time, correct, Madam
It starts at 6 p.m., so a half hour later than normal.
Okay, and just for the record, because we just made tickets today, the city manager and I will not be at that meeting, so remember to channel me, Ms. Hughes Candies. All right, with that, we have Public Works, Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Public Works and Facilities met. We went over the sale transport grants, and this year's sale got 3 vehicles instead of their annual 1. We also talked about the field house flood mitigation efforts, and we got an update on the Juneau North Douglas crossing. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Ms. Hughes Candies, Lands, Economic and Housing Development.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We had a meeting on whatever day that was, and we talked about rezones. The city is the customer, for lack of a better word, in several requested rezones around the community. Mr. Blydorn was able to announce the public meetings that are taking part in the schedule, so they will be having neighborhood meetings for each of those rezones, and then Mandy Cole announced when those were going to the Planning Commission. So a lot of interest in watching to see how those come out. We also talked about the air quality monitoring program. There was need to make sure that with the changed use of the Floyd Dryden Middle School, that we could still do the air quality monitoring that we do at the EC, and we will indeed. We also got an update on who purchased the foreclosure on 6th Street. And it sounds like they're ready and excited to clean up the site, so we don't have to worry about it becoming a nuisance property.
Well, that's good news. Mr. Smith, you have some appointments for us, Human Resources.
Yes, Madam Mayor, the Human Resources Committee met before this meeting, heard annual reports from a number of commissions, the Juneau Human Rights Commission and the Douglas Advisory Board. We also discussed and heard about the Parks and Rec naming policy, and we decided if we would bring it back to the retreat to see if that's a priority that the new assembly wants to focus on if we want to do a broader policy. However, we also, the Human Resources Committee unanimously recommended, and I move that the full assembly reappoint Mary Wagner and appoint Allison Gottschlick, both for terms beginning immediately and ending May 31st, 2027, and appoint Paige English to an unexpired term beginning immediately and ending May 31st, 2026. This is to the Juneau Human Rights Commission, and I ask for unanimous consent on those appointments.
Any objection? Those people are appointed.
Very good. The Human Resources Committee unanimously recommended that the Assembly appoint Benjamin Rubenstein to the Douglas Advisory Board for an unexpired term beginning immediately and ending September 30th, 2025, and I ask for unanimous consent on that motion.
Any objection? Seeing none, they are appointed.
And lastly, the Human Resources Committee unanimously recommended, and I move the appointment to the Historic Resources Advisory Committee, Cheryl GB, to a term beginning immediately and ending June 30th, 2027, and Robin Brenner to a term beginning immediately and ending June 30th, 2026, and I ask for unanimous consent on those appointments.
Any objection? Seeing none, they are appointed.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
All right, so moving on to liaison reports and comments and questions. Mr. Bryson, you have anything?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. At the Bartlett meeting, they discussed the CEO search, which they have now since completed, and we found out that Bartlett turned a profit for the first time. My notes didn't say how long, but they had like 2 months in a row that they had actually been profitable. 3 months in a row.
2019.
Oh, it had been since 2019, but they did have some profitability there. So the actions that Bartlett is taking is having an impact. The CSWA, the Southeast Alaska Solid Waste Authority, received a $500,000 Denali Commission grant. They discussed at length their tire cutter because used tires are a problem for all of Southeast Alaska. They also discussed Rasmussen grants, and we were informed at that meeting that Rasmussen doesn't like trash, but Rasmussen does like recycling and composting, so for the Assembly's knowledge. And the Valley neighborhood group had a meeting together that was chaired by the new executive director of the Glory Hall to discuss homeless issues that are happening in the Valley right now and some changes that could be coming. I'll just leave it at that. All right, that's my report, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Before I forget, I want to say for anyone listening, the clerk said they had received their ballots and that we can vote now. I just wanted to put in a plug for the municipal forum hosted by K2 and the League of Women Voters. It's a nonpartisan forum, and that will be tomorrow at 7 p.m. and Wednesday at 7 p.m. for the school board. So tomorrow, assembly, next day, school board. You can go to K2 Studios or you can stream it on 360 North. So get educated and then vote. Travel Juneau, we are scheduling a meeting soon, waiting to hear. I've already answered because I'm so good. And then when everyone replies to the doodle, we'll have an upcoming meeting, but Ms. Perry sent out an update just on staffing, which is fine at Travel Juneau, trade convention attendance. They're already thinking ahead for winter prep and how they're going to market that. Juneau Housing and Homelessness Coalition, I could not recall if I had gotten the chance to report or if I had missed our regular assembly meeting. I just want to share that following the shooting of our community member that there was a real impactful Juneau Housing and Homelessness meeting, and they had invited JPD, and it was a good talk through. Obviously, many of the providers knew Stephen. And one thing they discussed was just the need for continued community healing. So I wanted to share that, and I'm not sure what that looks like. And that was in addition to the normal sort of business of that group, which is sharing, who has vacancies opening up, what are the requirements, and just giving updates on their own agencies. And then SRRC, I was out of town and not able to attend their last meeting. I do want to inform this group that I spoke with the city attorney earlier today, and I am working with the attorney on a body cam release ordinance. So that would be, it would stipulate when we release body cam footage. And I think there was interest from other members in working on something like that. So I'm just putting it out to the group that, or the attorney said that's good and fine, and it would be good for us to have one, but please let me know if you'd like to collaborate on that, because that'll make it easier for the attorney. And that concludes my report.
Thank you.
I'm going to add that I just hit my 20th year anniversary in Juneau.
Yay.
I went right past that.
Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Chamber met last week, and it was Laura Martinson's last meeting as president. She'll become past president, and Ben Brown is the incoming president for the chamber. They also had quite a number of turnover on their board, lots of people, lots of long-term board members turning off. I don't have all of their names, nor do I know the new directors, but just want to let folks know will be a lot of changing faces on that board. Eagle Crest also met since we last spoke, but I will skip that report because we'll be diving into all things Eagle Crest on Wednesday. I'm happy Ms. Hughes-Gandy is working on a body cam policy or video release policy. This is, you know, we got to see behind the scenes what goes into figuring out when to release that, how to release it, and it definitely feels like some consistency for hopefully never again in the future, but in the event that it does happen, that we are more defined in what we do and what situations. So thank you for working on that. And in the space of continued focus on community healing, you know, I said last time, I'm glad we have gotten past the investigation, and I think we still owe the community a conversation, a dialogue about how we, as our responsibility as CBJ within the broader community, what is our responsibility to prevent anything like that from happening again. And so just going to keep saying that until we figure out the right way to do that. I don't know if that's a community listening session, you know, an opportunity for folks to hear from us and vice versa. But now that that investigation is over with, it feels like the right time so we don't just move on. And that is all from me.
Thank you, Ms. Wall. Ms. Atkinson, anything to add?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I attended the JCOS meeting on September 4th. There was a lot of talk about grant updates as well as possibly updating the climate action plan, which is outdated, and they're looking at the process they will be doing for updating that. I also attended Docks and Harbors meeting at the end of August. A lot of regulatory changes they're looking at, as well as Taku Harbor repair options. So that was the main things on my liaison appointments. I don't have anything new to add in terms of what Ms. Hughes-Gandy and Ms. Wall were discussing. Just that I want to echo that I do think we can't just move on, and community listening session, however that looks, I think is something we should do in the near future with the body cam footage just being released. It is time now, when we're, you know, processing this as a community, to have that forum open for folks. And if Ms. Hughes-Gandy wants assistance with that ordinance on body cam release, I would be happy to help with that.
Thank you, Ms. Atkinson. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I attended, there was only one planning commission meeting since our last meeting, and that was on the 27th. September 10th meeting was canceled due to technical difficulties. The school board finance committee met on August 28th. They discussed a few things. I think one thing that stands out is their efforts to use technology to increase transparency. I heard them talk about leveraging technology to make their finances more visible both to the public and to the assembly. So I'm looking forward to see where that discussion ends up going. The emergency planning committee did not meet on September 11th. Instead, they ended up relocating to Tlingit and Haida's or rather directing the usual attendees to the Tlingit and Haida Public Safety Division for their open house. So that was an interesting event to attend, and I got to have a discussion with some community members and put them in touch with certain members of our emergency planning committee, so to help answer some questions. So I felt like that was productive. The day after our last meeting, I worked, that was the day we had the primaries, so that was a very long day for me. I started at 6 a.m. Over at Juneau Christian Center. That was the polling location I was stationed at, and finished at 9:30 p.m. It was not only a very fulfilling experience, despite the low turnout, since we had no contested races in Juneau, but it was a very educational experience when it comes to the process and all the procedures that go into auditing and checking and double checking. And so I think if anybody has any skepticism about how our ballots are counted, I think that would be a very worthwhile endeavor. Go volunteer and be a poll worker. I I had a few things to add to what Ms. Hughes-Gandes, Ms. Wool, and Ms. Atkinson have all discussed. I too believe that this discussion needs to continue with in regards to how we can heal. Still, like them, I'm also not sure exactly what this discussion, what this healing looks like, but I think it's important. I've also done a little bit of work on something, or at least a little bit of homework on body camera release. I've talked with Chief Boss. I've also who has also indicated an interest in working on this, and I've also reached out to Assembly members in Anchorage to look at their policy as well. So we're not inventing anything from scratch. So if there's any assistance I can offer in that, just let me know. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Smith?
Madam Mayor, school board met last week. A fair bit of discussion on just some of the transitions due to consolidation. Some good news, enrollment is up. The transition is challenging for some folks. There's kids repeating classes at Thunder Mountain. They're having issues with staffing and being able to execute, the individual education plans, IEP plans for all students. Anyway, a lot of transition there, but I think there's bright spots and then challenges as you'd expect. The Downtown Business Association met. They've reappointed members, had some discussion on Proposition 2, and are going to be electing their new leadership of that association. I guess just one thing, I did meet with a member of the community about ACT teams where maybe there's not necessarily police response to people having mental kind of health crises or other type of crisis. Anyway, I've been kind of talking with Deputy Manager Barr about that and kind of getting a sense of where that went and anyway, any roadblocks to that, but might be an area to focus on in the future. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And I forgot one item too, because I couldn't read my writing. Ms. Hale and I attended a ceremony on the Carnival Miracle. The Carnival and Allen Marine Tours got together, and for every person booked on Allen Marine Tours, the Carnival gave $1 towards the Alaska Carbon Reduction Fund, and they were able to raise $50,000. And so Alaska Carbon Reduction Fund was there, and if people don't know, that's a subsidiary of Alaska Heat Smart. So with that $50,000, they can help a lot of lower income families try and get away from carbon or fossil fuels. So that was a pretty exciting event, and I forgot that because, like I said, I couldn't read my writing. So just to reiterate, Madam Manager and I will be leaving Wednesday morning and getting back Friday night. So our first day will be through Katie Kitchell. She's already setting up appointments with the delegation, and then on Friday we will meet with different agencies, and we have Jackie Peta, Vice President of Central Council, and Sabrina, and I'm just drawing a blank on Sabrina's last name.
Gutierrez?
Right, who is the EOC incident commander, so hopefully we'll be able to get lots done while we're back there. So with that, we will move on to continuation of public participation on non-agenda items. Mr. Sabatini, do you have anything? Since you're the only member of the public, with that, we are adjourned unless we have anything over from the staff to add. Yay.
We have one request from staff. If you guys can help stack chairs, I have to reset this up for the polling place in the morning.